Good morning from Tsukuba, Japan. I'm Takeshi Toma, working for the Forestry and Forest Product Research Institute, FFPRI, Japan. Thank you for watching our side event at the APCW 2021, organized by FFPRI with partners in the region. For your information, this is only one event that focusing on role of forest in this regional climate event. This slide shows keywords I noted during the opening session yesterday. I believe that forest can contribute these keys, but I did not hear about forest on yesterday. So allow me to raise your attention the role of forest. Forest ecosystem and their sustainable management can contribute both for mitigating and adapting to climate change as an integral part of the climate solution. REDD-plus is a scheme for rewarding reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, as well as enhancement of forest carbon stock. REDD-plus keeps forests in good condition and maximize forest capacity for disaster risk reduction. For forest-based disaster risk reduction, FDRR, we have rich experiences in Japan. Severe disasters occurred after deforestation many times. Restoring degraded forest for disaster risk reduction we experienced. And in recent years, we use modern technology such as remote sensing, GIS for FDRR for risk mapping. This forest technology is expected to contribute DRR in the tropics. So both REDD-plus and FDRR require to fit local reality because there are people who depend on ecosystem services from forests as their safety net. Experiences from REDD-plus activities shall be utilized for adopting FDRI techniques on the ground. In this side event, we would like to discuss not only the potential of forest-based mitigation and adaptation measures, but also challenges for achieving them. Thank you for your attention. So let me start the presentation session. The first one is Japanese forest technologies for disaster risk reduction in developed countries. Wataru Murakami and colleagues in FFPRI will deliver that presentation. Murakami-san, please turn on your video and microphone. The time is yours.
Hello, I am Wataru Murakami. I'd like to thank you for giving me the chance to speak here today. I start. In today's presentation, we would like to introduce Japanese forest technologies for disaster risk reduction in developing countries. My talk is divided into the following 4 topics. Recent years, sediment disasters appear increasing in mountain areas. Along climate change due to global warming, which are increasing intensity and frequency of heavy rainfall. Land use change, such as land conversion of forest to farmland, has been especially enhancing the problematic situation. Japanese mountains used to be extensively deforested and mountain disasters occurred frequently. About 100 years ago, efforts for preventing erosion on mountain slopes, for increasing resilience to mountain disasters through making afforestation together with build supplementary facilities initiated. and Japanese mountains are now secretly covered with forest, and mountain disasters gained better resilience. We think this Japanese experience is quite useful when introducing the concept of FDRR, forest-based disaster risk reduction. We think Japanese experiments and forest technologies can contribute to the prevention and mitigation of mountain disasters in other countries and areas. So next slide, we will present here a piece of progress of our ongoing project in Vietnam. This figure shows a result of our analysis using Google Earth Engine to extract landslides from Sentinel-2 satellite images. We developed an automated landslide extraction method and applied it to a mountainous area in Vietnam. The COVID-19 pandemic makes us impossible to conduct ground truth in the field yet, but we will refine the method through the project. One of the objectives of our project is to develop a GIS-based system for working out needs-based risk maps, which will make a focus on specific aspects such as landslides occurrence or evacuation route, depending on local needs. The risk maps are organized on GIS using data of the extracted landslide area, land use, rainfall event, topography, geology, uh, social requirement, economic benefit, and so on. Vietnam has strong expertise in GIS-based analysis, so we will collaborate to develop the system with the Vietnamese counterpart. That's all for our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Murakami-san, for your presentation. The next presentation is entitled Halting and Reversing Deforestation and Forest Degradation, Legal and Sustainable Supply Chains by Dr. Mao from ITTO. Although he is online now, we use pre-recorded video of his presentation because we are afraid poor internet connection.
Thank you for inviting me to this important side event being organized under Asia Pacific Climate Week 2021. I am Mao Hwan-Ok from ITTO. Allow me to share the perspective on halting, reversing deforestation and degradation from ITTO experience. I would like to highlight 3 points. First, halting and reversing deforestation degradation is a critical challenge in climate goals as deforestation continues to take place at an alarming pace in the tropics. The recent FAO's Forest Assessment Report estimates the rate of deforestation at 10 million hectares per year between 2015 and 2020. Indonesia has lost 700,000 hectares of forest per year between 2010 and 2020. Recognizing that land-based estimation, including deforestation degradation, account for 23% of greenhouse gas emissions, it is crucial to continuously increase international effort to reduce deforestation and forest degradation in the tropics. Second, sustainably managed forests can increase an important role in climate change and mitigation adaptation. Forests helping keep our climate stable, absorbing carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen. Forests also provide a habitat to more than half of all species found on the land. Over 1 billion people are also dependent on the forest for fuel, food, and medicine. Only sustainable managed forests can provide enhanced social, environment, economic benefit Therefore, it is important to strengthen acceptance practice, avoiding forest loss and degradation to mitigate climate change by maintaining forest ecosystem types, productivity, biodiversity, and carbon stewardship. For the sustainable management of production forest in the traffic, we hope ITTO voluntary guidelines published in 2015 are providing practical guidance. Third, and my final message is that timber legality is an important step toward the sustainable forest management. Large consumer markets such as North America, Europe, and Japan have established regulation based on principle of SFM sustainability, legality, requiring environmentally responsible production, and evidence of legal origin of trade timber products. At the recent G7 meeting held in UK, the G7 leaders committed to a global mission to halt reverse biodiversity law by 2030. The G7 leaders welcomed the commitment of trade ministers to share the best practice to support the sustainable supply chains that decouple agricultural production from deforestation and forest degradation. Since ITTO has managed legal and sustainable supply chain of timber products, we look forward to the collaboration partnership between consumer and producer countries to advance global regional sustainable supply chains. Thank you all for your attention.
So I think we can learn the importance of the supply chain improvement even in forestry. And the next presentation is a live one by Houria Djoudi of CIFOR. She will be talking on climate change related to finance and gender issues in Indonesia. Houria, please turn on your microphone and camera. Now time is yours.
Thank you very much, Toma. Thank you for inviting me to speak in this side event. My name is Houria Djoudi. I work for CIFOR, and I am sharing now my presentation. Please let me know if you can see it. Can you see it, Toma?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, thank you very much. So in this presentation, I would like to raise the attention about the importance of gender issues in both in climate change, but also in forests. And I will share some examples from our work in Indonesia in CIFOR. First, I would like to start to ask the question, why gender is important in climate change. And we know that women are, from all the poor people in the world, 70% of them are women. We also know that 20% of the world's land is only owned by women, while more than 400 million of women are farmers. So because of these inequalities in the access to the asset you need to adapt, women are likely to be more impacted by climate change. We also know that forest and forest products are very important for women's livelihood. We have data showing that the income from women can be from 24% to 40% coming from forest and trees. So what we did in Indonesia, we tried to figure out how are the finance used at the national level to deal with climate change, how is gender integrated in these actions in the ground. So what I'm presenting is coming really from data collected in two sites in Lombok and in Central Java. I will talk today more about the Central Java example because I don't have much time. And in this example, they were actions on agroforestry and afforestation programs, which are mitigation actions, which were mitigation actions in the beginning, but of course, they also had adaptation co-benefits, like, for instance, to protect river banks and to avoid landslides. What we see, I'm going directly to the result, is that actually those actions had a positive impact in terms of mitigation and adaptation, in terms of carbon, in terms of disaster risk reduction. But what we see is that was really little attention given to gender. For instance, there was no gender analysis in the initial budget, which then at the end, when you don't have the budget from the beginning, when you go to the implementation, of course, gender issues were not a part of the implementation. We also find that there are different perceptions about what is gender and how people can apply gender approaches in the ground. There is here a capacity building need to make sure that people understand and have also the tools how to deal with gender issues. We also found there are structural gender limitations. For instance, how women get access to information, how do they participate or not in workshops. For instance, when the trees were chosen for the afforestation, women were not a part of this. So what we see at the end, and maybe this is an interesting conclusion we need to make, is while we are excluding women, this is not just that we are having a negative impact on women themselves. For instance, here in this case, some plantation increased the workload of women, but we are also having problems with the sustainability of the actions, because what we saw in those sites, for instance, in some of them, that there is a low tree survival because women are the ones who are taking care of those trees and they had no incentives to do so. So the trees at the end died. So the recommendations we had is that gender integration is really important in all phases of budget designing and planning, and not just when it comes to the implementation. Gender responsive vulnerability analysis is very important because there we understand the difference between social group and between different villages in terms of vulnerability, but also we understand what are the specific gender vulnerabilities, which also include the exclusion from decision making, for instance, or the access to the asset. There is, as I said before, the capacity building need for gender tools and methods. And this is actually what we try to do, that we developed a set of gender variables which covers 7 important gender domains, which we published and translated in Bahasa Indonesia, that those can be used in the climate financing at the national level, that at the end we have a gender responsive climate finances which take in account the different vulnerabilities. If you want to know more, there is those links. You can have a look. You have more details there, and we have even a very small animation for policymakers to explain those complex gender issues and the link between gender, forest, and finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Houria, for your presentation. It reminded me the importance of gender mainstreaming. And now, the next presentation is forest-based mitigation and adaptation in the Philippines by Dr. Rodel D of ICRAF and Oscar M. Lopez Center. We use pre-recorded video for his presentation.
Good morning to all of you. I'd like to talk to you about the role of forests in mitigation and adaptation in the Philippines. We are fortunate to have worked with the Ministry or Department of Environment and Natural Resources and look at their 10 priority programs and how they relate to adaptation and mitigation of climate change. Of these 10 priority programs, at least 4 deal with forests. We have the conservation of existing forests, protection of these forests, for example, against illegal cutting, Second, the enhanced national greening program. Third, conservation of biodiversity. And third, coastal resources management. And based on our analysis of these programs, we found out that in the Philippines, tropical forests have both adaptation and mitigation roles. On the left side, you see there the adaptation roles. Forests in the Philippines help make us more climate resilient. For example, when we have forests in watersheds, there is stable water flows. Second, there is also provision of goods and services coming from these forests, both from the local communities as well as communities outside the forest. There's protection of biodiversity. As you know, the Philippines is one of the mega diversity countries of the world and one of the hotspots in the world. And a lot of our biodiversity resources can be found in our forests. And finally, for local communities, especially, increased income and livelihood. There are millions of Filipinos living in these forests, and they derive their livelihoods from forests, including many of our indigenous peoples. At the same time, there are also mitigation benefits from these forests. They harbor carbon, so carbon stocks conservation if we don't cut them. If we increase forest area and plant more trees, then we increase carbon sequestration, and overall it leads to reduced greenhouse gas emissions. For example, in our latest submission to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, you see here that forests are carbon sinks. The land use change and forestry is negative, almost offsetting a lot of our emissions from energy and other sources. Another example, this time for adaptation, is our mangrove forest. According to one study by the World Bank, if our current mangroves were lost, we have about 100,000, more than 100,000 hectares. If these are lost, then 600,000 more people will be flooded annually. Damage to property would increase by $1 billion annually. And the study also calculated that each hectare of mangroves has a value of more than $3,000 of flood reduction benefits. So in conclusion, our forests help a lot in mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Thank you very much.
So we learn about Philippines, and the following presentation is on Vietnam. Dr. Phuong from Vietnam Academy of Forest Science on forest-based mitigation and adaptation in Vietnam. Dr. Phuong, please turn on your video and microphone. Now time is yours. Dr. Phuong, please turn on your microphone.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good morning. From Vietnam. So my name is Phuong. I work for Vietnam Academy of Forest Science. I will be talking about the forest-based mitigation and adaptation in Vietnam. So because of the time limited, so I try to focus on the emission and natural disaster reduction and how Vietnam is, address.
Dr. Phuong, excuse me. Can you use the slideshow mode?
Yes, okay.
And is your video on? Now I can see your slide.
Okay. So I will be talking about mitigation and adaptation in Vietnam. First, I will be talking about the emission and disaster status in Vietnam. So our latest data for national GHG emission inventory shows that we have 317 million tons of the CO2 emissions for the 2016. And according to the sector, you can see the energy sector has largest portion of the emission, followed by the IPPU. In the absolute sector, including agriculture and the LULUCFs, we have about 14% of the total emission in the country. But if we only count for the LULUCF, we have minus 39 million tons of CO2 for 2016. And if you count per head, so the average emission per head is 3.4 million tons of CO2 per head. Is quite high already. So Vietnam will have to address emission reduction in the coming years. For the disaster, we have a different type of disaster, and especially the disaster is expected to increase because of the climate change. We have the flooding in the lowland and flat flood in the mountain area, and we also have a landslide, drought, and other kind of the disaster. And according to our records from 2016, 2006, and 2020, the annual loss is about 0.8 up to the 1% of the GDP is quite high. And under the climate change, it's expected, forecast us 60% of land are vulnerable to the climate change, and also the 71% of the population also is under the risk of the climate change. To address that, Vietnam already have some goal targets for emission reduction and natural disaster reduction. So this is committed in our nationally determined contribution that we first submit in 2016, and we have revised that and DC in 2021. So for mitigation component, we have the target for emission reduction for key 4 sectors like energy, agriculture, LULUCF, and waste sector. The emission according to the business as usual in 2020 is expected to be 528 million tons, and by 2030 it's almost 1,000 million tons. So it's quite increased a lot. And for that, we aim to reduce 9% of the emission as BOR by 2030. And if we have additional resource from external, so we can reduce emission up to 27% as a business as usual. So for the disaster reduction, we also consider the forest is a very important measure to help the reducing the disaster. So we have one of the very big component also under the adaptation is reducing the disaster. And you can see both mitigation and adaptation in our country also have maybe several measures that rely on the forest. So here is a more clear picture how we use the forest as the measure to reduce emission and reduce disaster. So for the reducing the emission, we have a different the activity like reducing the emission from the deforestation and forest degradation. We do the reforestation, and we also enhance the forest quality of both planted and the natural forest. And we also apply the agroforestry in the to secure the food for the local people, and also to help the conserve the soil and also increases the soil carbon or something like that. And we also apply the sustainable forest management. So you can see we have several initiatives and a program on the rest. So we are quite successful. So up to the 2020, we already reduced about 30% of emission under the REDD scheme. And for the disaster reduction, we also focus on reforestation, restoration, improved forest management, and sustainable forest management. I have to highlight that for the sustainable forest management, we already have the National Forest Certification Scheme that we aim to practice, the sustainable forest management principle in the country. So in some places, you can see we have the co-benefit between mitigation and adaptation from the forestry sector, because they have both a function on reducing emission and also reducing the natural disaster. So we also found some challenge. So the key challenge here we found for achieving our emission reduction targets and also the disaster reduction is, the first is the carbon market is not effectively operated, I think, in both international level and also in Vietnam. So you can see that in the forestry, the carbon price is quite low price, and there is a very, very strict technical barrier. And there are also some kind of uncertainty for estimating the emission reduction, and a lot of principle and also requirement for verification of the emission reduction. Vietnam is now building its own carbon domestic markets, but it's is expected to be operated in 2027. So it's the next few years. So we also see the high opportunity cost of land use, comparing between the other land use and forest, for example, rubber and the forest. So that's why they still pressure on the forest for conversion, because of the low benefit from the forest if you put into the conservation or something like that. And for the natural disaster reduction, we found some limitation on understanding of the interaction between the forest and the disaster mitigation. For example, how to choose the best tree species, how to find the minimum the forest area to be appears in the area, and especially the area for the forest distribution is very important. So those things is very important for making the policy option and also for designing the forest-based measure for disaster mitigation. And the second challenge for our disaster mitigation is the requirement of the forest loggings. For example, how to do the road construction in the appropriate way, how to adjust the cut area in the vulnerable area, for example. So this is also require a lot of understanding on that. And the last important point is how to integrate natural disaster prevention into planning, into land use development. So we need to consider it is an important factor in the preparing the land use plan. So thank you very much for your time and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phuong, packing all aspects within 4 minutes. I really appreciate your effort and brings of your slide sharing. And let me call the last presenter, Dr. Makino Yamanoshita and Hideyuki Kubo from IGES. Forest for Community Well-being as an approach for climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. So, Dr. Phuong, please turn off your video. And Makino-san, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Toma-san. It's a pleasure to thank you for your invitation to give us opportunity to make presentation in this good, nice event. Today in our presentation, we propose an approach to consider well-being of local communities who live closely to forests for climate change mitigation and adaptation. In the debate of climate change, there might be no room for doubt that our ultimate goal is to achieve human well-being. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment clearly shows that various ecosystem services are linked to the components of human well-being. Local communities living near forests cannot be ignored when considering forest conservation and climate change. Given the fact that billions of people depend on forests for their livelihood, we should put more attention, and we should put local community at the center of our discussion. When people are in a state of energy scarcity, they look to the value of the energy source among the various values that forests provide to achieve their well-being. Then they make the decision to cut down and utilize the forest. And we, so-called experts, see firewood collection as a driver of deforestation. And the typical way to deal with this deforestation driver is to offer new technology to local people as an alternative, providing improved cookstove, LPG, and electricity as alternatives is very common way. Unfortunately and interestingly, a number of case studies have reported difficulties, even failures, in promoting the new technologies to local people. It is reported that the cookstove provided is not suitable for their traditional way of cooking, or they are not aware of other benefits that the new technology brings to them, such as time savings. We can learn from the study that not only we need to provide new technologies, but we also need to provide the support to the local community. The support does not only mean financial support or the analysis on economic feasibility of the new technology. We need to provide various types of capacity building that will enable people to take advantage of those technologies to utilize them. By the capacity buildings, we can promote social acceptance of the new technology. And finally, the deforestation driver is addressed. Then after stopping the deforestation, we expect the local people to continuously manage and conserve the forests. This means that the local community needs to identify what forest values may contribute to their well-being and leverage the values. However, it's not so easy. So again here, capacity building needs to be provided continuously to the local community. We need to support them creating opportunities for themselves by facilitating communities discussion and help them thinking on how they want to be like in the future and what forest value will help them achieving it. Of course, we may need to provide trainings for skills and knowledge they identify during the discussion. When the local community clearly captures a new value of forests, which is meaningful to their life, they will have a strong sense of ownership of forests, and that will lead to effective climate mitigation and adaptation actions. We conceptualize such capacity building as the expansion of freedom of choice of the local people for what they value doing and being. REDD-plus recognized the importance of capacity building through all phases, from readiness to implementation. Until now, much effort has been focused on building capacity for forest monitoring and governance at the national level and subnational level. Strengthening national level capacity through policy approach of the REDD-plus can be seen as a laying the foundation for communities to play an active role. We believe that it is time to think seriously about how we can help local people to unleash their potential in their forest-related climate change intervention. By putting community well-being at the center, climate change action will become more effective and sustainable. That's all from me.
Thank you, Makino, for your pretty presentation. So now, time for discussion. So all presenters, please turn on your video and microphone. Let's discuss on the potential and challenges of the role of forests for climate change. Before this side event starts, I have received 2 questions via email, and one is very technical one to Dr. Murakami and colleagues. So, Dr. Murakami, you have explained about the automatic landslide extraction method. Could you please explain what technical problems you found when you actually applied this method to a mountainous area in Vietnam?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Yes, we did find some problems when we applied this method to the mountainous area of Vietnam. One of them, as you can see from the figure, is that there is a longer period of cloud cover in the area than in Japan, which resulted in an analyzed area. To solve this problem, we took a longer analysis period. However, another problem arose. In Vietnam, the vegetation in landslide areas recovers quickly, making it difficult to identify them. So we are currently working on solving this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Murakami-san. And another question is to Dr. Ma. The question, the person asked you, support your idea that it should be effective to reducing emissions from deforestation and sustainable forest management by taking the approach through supply chain improvement. Could you tell us your views on future of the standard system? Do you think, is it possible for timbers produced from jurisdictional REDD-plus project as one of the integrated standards which achieve both mitigation and supply chain improvement? Dr. Ma, please. And turn on your microphone, yes.
Thank you very much. I think there are many solutions to contribute climate change from the forest sector. We understand deforestation or degradation account like 13 or 11%, a huge amount. So solution would come from sustainable forest management, particularly contributing the sustainable production and consumption could contribute to significantly global climate crisis. So in terms of the legality or sustainability, I believe starting from the harvesting side, we learned from the veteran presentation, still there are some of the lack of guideline, lack of implementation of environment-friendly harvesting. So this is some of the way we call the, carbon smart reduced impact logging. So that would be one of the options. And also we understand that SFM, there is huge room to contribute mitigation, adaptation. So I believe in the future, the REDD-plus, the framework also can be expanded to more the forest-based mitigation measure. Also, we understand the adaptation we learn from the Rodel from Philippines. I think there is huge of the opportunity to increase the this one. This one maybe not the standard, but we believe there is also a bunch of opportunity for forest sector to contribute to really low carbon industry and future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. And again, I received, excuse me, I heard Hideyuki Kubo in our presenter would like to make question. I don't know to whom, but Kubo-san, please.
Thank you, Toma-san. Thank you, all the speakers, for your clear and inclusive presentations. It's not a question I have, but I just want to share my observations. I have two observations from today's presentations. First, every speaker discussed the topic from different standpoints, but what interesting was that your framing on the topic is quite similar and encompassing a range of diverse issues and challenges. That means we are already on the same page, so that we must be able to make an extensive collaboration among different institutions and address challenges in an effective manner. Second, in the presentations, we had some success stories, but still limited and on the pilot scale. This is because we have not come to the stage with a large scale achievement on forest-based mitigations and adaptation actions. We know REDD-plus program are being implemented for more than a decade, but deforestation and the forest degradation still persist. Disaster prevention actions have already been executed in many places in the world with progress, but difficult to prepare for all the possible disasters. So I think we really need to find out ways to scale up forest-based mitigations and adaptation actions, including the increased attention to gender and human well-being perspectives. That's my observations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kubo-san. And related to the point, the large-scale implementation, and I have a question to Rodel. You mentioned the destruction of mangrove have been serious in the Philippines. Do you have any actions for reversing such trend in your country?
Yes, Thomas-san, there is efforts by the government to conserve and even preserve our remaining mangrove forests. There is what is known as coastal resources management and even biodiversity management. And the government has also banned cutting of these trees. So all our mangrove forests are now part of the protected forests of the Philippines. And even private sector and civil society, NGOs, they are also very active, local communities, they are very active in protecting our remaining mangrove forests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one more question come through email. I think this is come to us for FFPRI. The question from Mr. Goseki in Cambodia. Though FDRR is important in many countries, after disaster, emergency rescue and foreign recovery planning are tend to be done only by gray infrastructure. So thus FDRR plans are usually not included in recovery packages. How can we make transformative changes in such situation? The question is how to connect the forest DRR and also some so-called gray infrastructure. So Okamoto-san or Furuichi-san, can you answer this difficult question?
Okay, so it's been sometimes discussed or raised that's a question, but it seems to us means we are dealing with forestry sector, and forest can play important role to soil erosion or land sliding, and also on the coast, it's the mangrove forest can protect the tsunami wave as well. It's well known. So it's just unbalancedly viewed the forestry forest contribution to prevent disasters. The Japanese experience history tells us that if mountain is forested, less landslides occurring, less soil erosion occurring. That's our history and our experience. So we just try to understand well by ourselves, but also we want to talk our experience and history to other countries. That is on our ongoing project. Try to do in coming years. But my point is just it is well, say it is not well balanced anyway. Only the gray infrastructure is its important role, but also forest itself and land planning itself has important meaning to manage our ecosystem and also the disaster mechanisms.
Yeah, thank you. Because of time limitation, I just moved quickly to Dr. Phuong. How you feel using forest for disaster risk reduction? Do you see good example in your country?
Yes, so thank you very much. Actually, we have a very strong political support from the government on the natural disaster reduction because we are suffering, I think, strongly from the disaster. We have a long coastline, more than 3,000 kilometers, and the climate change scenario indicates that we are going to be more vulnerable to the climate change impact. So in the forestry in 2016, we already have a national program on the restoration and sustained management of the coastal forest because we recognize the importance of the coastal forest in mitigating the disaster in coastal area. So the government has invested quite significant resources in the coastal management, including afforestation of the mangrove forest and also the restoration of mangrove and the sustainable management of mangrove. So in addition to restoring the mangrove forest, we also invest in the livelihoods improvement so that we can reduce the pressure on the mangrove. And another thing is we also have strengthened the law enforcement by the monitoring the land use planning in the coastal area and also enforcing the people to follow the legal framework on the forest management. So that's why we already achieved, I think, quite a significant result from the managing the mangrove and coastal area for reducing the disaster. Thank you.
Excuse me, yeah, time is nearly up, but I asked Houria from the gender perspective, just 1 minute left.
What is your question, Toma, about how?
We were talking about the very forest part, but we are missing from the gender perspective on the last discussion.
Yeah, I think Dr. Yamano put it very well in what she was saying, and it's linked to what I was saying. We need to think always about local communities and their well-being, but also to look at the equity issues, because climate change is going actually to have impact on people and the equity also. So we need to make sure that we are not leaving people behind or increasing the inequalities which are already there, and one of them is gender equality. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It really time is up, and I should close this side event. Thank you again, all of you, to join discussion and those who are watching this program. I hope we will meet physically in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Domo arigato gozaimasu.
Thank you very much. All the best.